10 players to stash before week 8 kicks off. This is Beat the Waiver Wire. We finally hit our goal of 1,000 subscribers, so just wanted to say thank you. And if you're new here, please hit that subscribe button. It helps us out a ton. The first player I want to talk about is Darius Slayton. Last week, Jaxson Dart put up 283 yards and 3 touchdowns on the road against Denver. His defense and kicker let him down, but that was a week after beating the Eagles, so I think we all can see that Jaxson Dart is the real deal at this point. Wan'Dale went 6 for 95 in that game. Daniel Bellinger went 3 for 88, and Theo Johnson went 3 for 66. The point being is, their number 2 and 3 pass catchers in that game were tight ends. So we would expect Darius Slayton to step into that 1A or 1B role with Wan'Dale once he's back. So I would still probably expect Wan'Dale to out-target Slayton more often than not because of the area of the field he operates in. But Dart is not afraid to throw it deep. And if they connect on a couple of those, plus the volume he should probably still get as well, he could be a fairly stable wide receiver 3 with some upside for the rest of the season. And, looking at their schedule the next 6 weeks, Philly, SF, Chicago, Green Bay, Detroit, New England, all before a week 14 bye, I don't know if they're going to be favored in any of those games, so he should have to air it out a decent amount. And with Slayton, he's obviously just a really solid player who always steps up, when given the opportunity. We saw that in a pretty small sample size last year when they were dealing with injuries at the wide receiver position as well. And with the improved quarterback play, I think Slayton is a really nice stash. And I think, his rostership being as low as it is a little bit surprising, but obviously that has to deal with him, being injured, and a lot of managers don't necessarily have IR spots. Next guy up, Jaylin Noel. So he had the highest snap share and targets on the season this last week. Of course, that had mostly to do with Christian Kirk missing the game and Nico Collins leaving in the fourth quarter with a concussion. If both of those guys are still out this week, there's a chance Noel can be a plug and play given how many teams there are on bye. And, since Nico got the concussion on Monday night, there's a higher likelihood of him not necessarily clearing protocol. But the reason I have Noel here as a stash for the rest of the season is it's no secret that the Texans' offense has been bad, and haven't really been able to get Nico going, but it's always worth taking a shot on rookie wide receivers in the second half of the season who are attached to good quarterbacks. I still think CJ Stroud's a good quarterback. I just think he's getting eaten alive behind his offensive line right now, unfortunately. And, I thought Jaylin Noel looked pretty good on Monday night. 7 targets, 77 yards, and his fellow Cyclone Jaden Higgins didn't even have a catch, which was kind of unfortunate. And, Noel was somebody who I liked personally as a prospect. Ironically, he kind of profiled similarly to Christian Kirk, so was bummed, when the Texans did bring in Kirk. And, he ended up being a 3rd round pick, but there was a lot of buzz about him going in the 2nd round. And a lot of scouts liked him over his running mate, Jaden Higgins, who the Texans took in the 2nd. There's a couple ways the rest of the season can go for the Texans, who currently sit at 2-4. They can turn it around on the backs of their young playmakers, and of course, Stroud and Nico, or they can completely fold and just kind of let the kids play. I'd bet on the latter, but either way, in a deeper format, I think Noel is worth stashing and being patient on. Plus, they're already through their bye, so you don't have to worry about navigating the upside. Next up, Darnell Mooney. I think Darnell Mooney can be a nice high upside flex play during bye weeks. Don't bank on him turning into an every week starter, and he actually has some flex appeal this week against the Dolphins with 6 teams on bye. But, we know he's the deep threat in this offense and a good player in his own right. We do have a game already this season where he saw 11 targets, and they had a bye, and he missed the following week due to injury, which is partly why, his rostership is so low. I personally had higher expectations for Mooney this season, but Kyle Pitts has actually been the number 2 in the passing attack. And, this is finally the offseason where everyone, or at least most everyone, was kind of out on Kyle Pitts, but he's getting some volume, but still is only tight end 18 on the season. And with Mooney, Penix likes to be aggressive downfield, and, they can hit on some of those big plays. But the issue for Mooney is their run game is obviously so elite with Bijan and Algier, and their defense is so good that they don't necessarily need to throw the ball as much as we had hoped. Penix is bottom 3rd in terms of pass attempts, but the overarching point is he's a good stash and has some flex appeal in weeks where the Falcons are facing elite offenses and should have to throw the ball more. Week 10 against the Colts is a good example of that. Next up, Kyle Monangai. It was clear during their week 5 bye that Ben Johnson's focus was on figuring out the run game, and the past 2 weeks, it's really looked like he's done that. Swift averaged 3.4 yards per carry the first 4 weeks to 7 the last 2 weeks. That's obviously not sustainable, but he's looked night and day better. And, also out of the bye, we see Monangai's snap share and touches increase. Now, last week against the Saints, a lot of that work came later in the game when the Bears had control of this one. But, Monangai looked good, and he even scored his first touchdown. And Roschon Johnson has had 2 carries on the season, so he's a non-factor. And the hope is that Monangai can carve out like a David Montgomery light type of role in this offense. Like, yes, Monangai was a 7th-round pick, but this is a guy who posted back-to-back 1,200-yard seasons, was a forced missed tackle machine, good in pass protection, and didn't have a single fumble on 676 carries in college. Tell me that's not a guy that Ben Johnson loves right there. Next player to stash, Isaiah Davis. So Breece Hall is a free agent after this year, and the Jets are a dumpster fire. They benched Justin Fields in the middle of that last game, and he's looked absolutely terrible. Now it looks like Tyrod Taylor is taking over as the starter for the rest of the season. So this team is completely in shambles, and I think shipping off Breece Hall to a team, maybe like the Chiefs, who knows, would make a lot of sense. And it's not like this coaching staff was necessarily all over Breece Hall in the offseason. They kept on talking about Isaiah Davis as well, and Braylon Allen, and now Allen is out for the season. So, it's not like Isaiah Davis is like this monster prospect that's looked incredibly explosive. This is just purely the potential for a huge volume play in this offense should Breece Hall be on the move. Next up, Brashard Smith. I will say the hopes for us Brashard Smith truthers that he was going to just take over as the lead back probably aren't going to happen at this point. Pacheco's looked a lot better the last couple weeks, and Kareem Hunt is probably always going to have a role in this offense. Now, with Brashard Smith this past week, he had the highest snap share and touches on the season, but most of those rush attempts were when the game was out of hand. But the reason Smith is a stash is it seems like his passing game role is legit. The last 4 weeks, he's had 4 targets, 3 targets, 4 targets, and 5 targets. And, Brashard Smith was a converted wide receiver, right? He was a wide receiver at Miami. He transfers to SMU, converts to running back. And that was a huge reason that SMU made the college football playoff last year. Not to mention he's an explosive athlete. He runs a 4.39. So if he's going to be getting a good amount of work in this pass game, he has some decent appeal, especially in PPR leagues. Running back on this list is Ollie Gordon. So stick with me here just a second. The reason I wanted to include Ollie Gordon is it's not like he's been getting a ton of work, and it's not like necessarily I'm saying just go out and handcuff Devon Achane, which, maybe you do. However, Miami is a complete dumpster fire, right? Like, the vibes around this team are horrible. They're sticking with his coach and Tua at least through this week, but the wheels are really falling off. So there's a slight chance that, and I don't necessarily think this is going to happen, but we can't rule out the potential possibility of them just having a complete fire sale in Miami. So they've kind of shushed off the rumors about moving Jalen Waddle. And, we haven't really heard many rumors about them moving Devon Achane, but Devon Achane is going to be on the last year of his rookie deal this next season. And I don't necessarily think that Miami's in a position to make a run next year. So if somebody presents an offer that's too good to pass up, I think that they should at least consider it. And again, if they clear house from top to bottom, who knows? So again, this is a very, very deep league stash. I'm surprised his rostership is actually at 21%. I know he got a lot of hype kind of coming into the year. And if you followed Gordon's collegiate career, 2 seasons ago, he was looking like he was going to be jockeying for the number 1 running back in the draft class, along with Ashton Genty, and then he completely falls off. A lot of that had to do with Oklahoma State just being a complete dumpster fire. And, since then, they've fired Gundy, but I digress a little bit. He was kind of just a weird, intriguing prospect that had tape that was phenomenal and then tape that was not so good. So I do think he can be a solid player. But again, this is just contingent upon the potential for Miami to have a fire sale. Again, I don't necessarily think that's going to happen, but can't rule it out at this point. The tight end position, we have Colston Loveland. So he had the highest snap percentage of the season at 67%. He also had his highest route percentage of the season at 63%. And unfortunately, it took an injury to Cole Kmet to kind of clear the way. And whether or not Kmet returns this week or when he returns, sometimes all it takes is getting a rookie on the field to take over from that veteran. And it's not like Kmet himself is a world beater. And, we saw Loveland Loveland had 4 targets this week, only 3 catches for 24 yards, but Caleb only threw the ball 26 times. So would expect that number to go up. And it's not like Colston Loveland was some 3rd-round tight end that, the Dynasty Bros loved and are desperately trying to make a thing. He was the 10th overall pick in the draft and Ben Johnson's first pick as a head coach. And, I'm not necessarily a fan of rostering two tight ends, so know your league. But in a deeper league with deep bench, if you've been playing the tight end carousel or have someone, at the position who's maybe been outperforming their expected production and can be patient, I think he's worth a stash to see if he can kind of go off in the second. For defense, got the Jacksonville Jaguars, so they are on their bye this week, so I would expect that roster percentage to go down even further as we get closer to Sunday. But they get the Raiders in week 9, and the Raiders have looked like an absolute dumpster fire. Now, there's a chance that the Raiders come out of their bye this week and, turn things around. There's a chance they get Brock Bowers back, Jacoby Myers stays, and they kind of just feed their studs. But there's also a chance that, Geno just continues to look horrible. And Jacksonville overall has had, a pretty solid defense this season. You see from a fantasy perspective, they are inside the top 10. So I think targeting the Raiders is something that we might be doing going forward. And again, very widely available. Next defense is the LA Chargers. So they do play on Thursday night, and I don't typically like to put Thursday night players on this list. So there's a chance you're watching this and this is already passed. But I will say as a Chargers fan, like their defense has not really looked good, especially the last few weeks. And a lot of that has to do with they're just dealing with so many injuries on both sides of the ball that they aren't necessarily themselves. But you're going to sense a theme, and I'm sure you've already sensed a theme if you've been watching these videos the last couple of weeks of just picking on the Tennessee Titans, and that's who they face in week 9. So even if their defense, struggles against Minnesota on Thursday night, and even if they don't necessarily look great week 9 against Tennessee, I just wouldn't expect Tennessee to put up more than 14 points in that game against them. And, they can get after Cam Ward because Cam Ward has just been getting sacked at, an incredibly high rate. Now that they have Khalil Mack back, allows them to get a little bit more pressure on the quarterback. So thank you guys so much for watching and good luck this week.